Though I would have probably just left.
Good evening. I call to order this special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District. It is September 3rd and the time is 5 p.m. I'll have a roll call starting from my far right.
Jan Michael Greenberg.
Sandy Kravitz.
Barbara Philibert, Allison Beckham, and Patty Beckman. All board members are present and we do have a quorum. All rise. Vice President Beckham, will you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, do any board members have any changes to the agenda? No? Okay, I move to approve the agenda as presented. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Kravitz seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Agenda is approved. We move now to our information and discussion items. 4A, update on the district's Arizona Merit and Ames Science scores for spring 2019. Ms. Faulkner?
That was quick.
Yeah, I was so fast. I'm done. Good afternoon, President Beckman, board members, Dr. Pinkard, and Sandra. My name is Cindy Bachna, and I'm here to talk to you today about trends in AZ Merit and Ames Science results. Please hold your questions for the end as they may be answered during the course of my presentation. Okay, to recap, the state tests right now are AZ Merit and Ames Science. AZ Merit was given to all of our 3rd through 11th grade students last year. The ELA test, English Language Arts, consists of both a reading portion and a writing portion. The math tests are based on grade level standards until students took high school level math. In those cases, the content areas in high school that were tested were Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. Ames Science is a test given in 4th, 8th, and 10th grades. Grades 4 and 8 are tested on the science standards for those grade levels, and in high school, the test is a test of biology. You see 9th grade also listed up there with an asterisk. If a student is taking biology as a 9th grader, they too qualify to take the Ames Science test at that point in time. Looking at this first slide here, this is a comparison of how Scottsdale's percent passing, which is the combination of proficient and highly proficient on AZ Merit, rates compared to those in the state of Arizona. The blue bars represent the Scottsdale averages, and the orange bars represent the state averages. You can see that we outperform the state in every area, but some of these differences are higher than others. 5th grade scores are the highest above the state averages. The differences in high school, however, are smaller. 5th grade ELA and 3rd grade math were the highest percent passing rates for the district in spring 2019. Comparisons to other school districts are not available at this time. Looking just at our English language arts scores, this is our 5-year trend in English language arts in terms of percent passing. The bars go from 2015 in blue, 2016 in orange, 2017 in gray, 2018 in yellow, and 2019 in dark, different color. You can see that grades 4, 5, and 6 were the highest they've been since the start of these assessments. Grade 9 ELA saw the biggest drop from spring 2018, while grades 3 and 11 did not change from 2019. So grade 3 was showing a percent passing of 65%, and grade 11 was showing 41%. Looking at the same information for math, how have our percent passing changed over time? Grades 6 and 7 were the highest they've been in 2019. Algebra 1 remained at the same level as those scores were in 2018, so a percent passing district-wide of 56%. Grades 3, 4, and 5 were down slightly from their previous high scores in spring 2018. So grade 3 was showing a 73% passing in 2019, grade 4 was showing 68% passing, and grade 5 was showing 70% passing. So what you see on this screen here is a different look little bit different look at our data. It's a chart of our ELA proficiency and growth by school. The horizontal axis along the bottom represents average growth percentiles by school. These growth percentiles are generated for every student that has 2 years worth of scores to compare. And each student is awarded a number from 1 at the lowest for growth to 99 at the highest. The state defines low growth as percentiles between the numbers of 1 and 33, average growth as the percentiles between 34 and 66, and high growth is from 67 and above. As you look along the vertical axis, you see proficiency or percent passing scores. Low proficiency is defined as anything 24% or lower, and high average proficiency is defined as 54% and above. You can see that the majority of Scottsdale students fall into the high proficiency average growth area. A majority of our schools are in that top middle box. The one standout here is Redfield Elementary School that last year demonstrated both high proficiency and high growth. I spoke with Christine Bono last week about this, just asking what's going on at your school, get some information. And she's saying that they have specific grade level goals which they use and follow with continuous student progress monitoring. They also have an intervention and enrichment plan for their campus. And she feels like that really influences the progress you're seeing up here. Now, the state did not generate student growth percentiles for high school students this summer, which is why the scatter plots only show your schools that represent grades 3 through 8. But next summer, we should have growth percentiles for the high school students again. This is a 1-year gap where they did not generate student growth percentiles for high school. Over the summer, I worked with some schools to look at their student growth data on a student-by-student basis. When I do that, I ask them to consider looking at the students and saying, okay, which ones demonstrated higher levels of growth? What were the characteristics in those classrooms where those students were at that those students were demonstrating higher growth? Can these techniques be applied to other students on your campus going forward? So that's the ELA. And this is the same information presented for math. Again, majority of our schools are in that top middle area where high proficiency and average growth, with the standouts of Sequoia and Desert Canyon Elementary for math. So I had the same conversations I had with Christine Bono with the principals of Sequoia and Desert Canyon Elementary. And both said first and foremost the quality of their teachers is paramount to what we're seeing up here, the quality of the instruction coming from those teachers. Both schools departmentalize for math, and Sequoia's schedule includes a daily 45-minute intervention block where students can get additional support in math and reading. Before I move on to the next slide, which is going to go into AIM Science, I wanted to address a question about how this data is used at the school level. Through the product School City, which is our assessment and data platform, schools can go in and look at these scores on demand for their students. They can look at which students went from proficiency levels and increased from 1 year to the next. They can look at the students that stayed in the same proficiency level. And they can also drill down and see the students that went back a level from 1 year to the next. So they are encouraged to do this, to go in and look at student by student to really see what's going on at the student level and have those conversations on their campuses about what went on in those classrooms, what were the successes, how did those students improve, or what happened with those students that went back, talk about it as teams as they're in their PLCs and work with their teachers to really identify practices on their campuses that can be modified and adjusted to other kids. Switching now to AIM Science results. This is how our schools have performed over time. You see in 8th and 9th grade, our results held steady. Our 4th grade results were down slightly last spring. And grades 10 scores were actually up 3% to a 37% passing. Now again, I mentioned this at the beginning. 9th graders are students taking biology ahead of time. It's generally a 10th grade course at the high school. So those 9th graders are a little bit more advanced. We would expect them to have higher average scores in the 9th grade than in the 10th grade. There isn't a state level comparison available on this one at this time. So this is just us comparing ourselves to ourselves over time. Finally, update on what the state test is going to look like in 1920. The state has decided to change the name of AZ Merit to something called AZM2. This doesn't stand for anything, I asked. It's just the new name of the test. AZM2 for English Language Arts in grades 3 through 8, there will be no change. In high school, however, there will be a single test in 10th grade. The 9th graders and 11th graders will no longer be taking an ELA test, just a 10th grade test. In math, there's no change in grades 3 through 6. In grades 7 and 8, all students will test on grade level. So any student that's taking an advanced math in middle school, that's taking Algebra 1 as an 8th grader, that test will no longer be available. They will just be taking the grade level test. And in high school, it's going to be a single math test that's a combination of Algebra 1 and geometry, a 60-40 split. So this is a change from what we've had so far the last 5 years, especially at the high school level. I've had discussions with all the high school principals. The schools have had the blueprints for the new tests. They know what to expect in terms of these percentages of different math content, and they've been making plans for how they're going to address the new exam, because this isn't what we've been doing for the last few years. In AIM Science, there's not going to be any change this year. It's going to stay the same as it's been the last few years. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Do any board members have questions? Board member Racco?
The information that you just provided, thank you very much. You mentioned, I'm curious as to why the changes in high school. Did they say why?
Yes, it's because of ESSA. The state has been out of compliance with ESSA for the last few years.
What is ESSA, Dr. Bachman? Elementary, Secondary School Act?
Sure, yes. It's a federal thing that we use to, it's who determines what testing we can use in the state. It's at the federal level. It determines our funding in terms of getting federal funding. So the tests we've been using at the high school until now did not meet the criteria of every student in high school taking the exact same test, because we had these tests that were given at the end of a course, and it was potential that a student would not take a certain test. So by going back to a point where everybody takes the same test in 10th grade, you meet the requirements of ESSA, and we aren't in jeopardy of losing funding.
So if a student doesn't pass or does pass in 10th, it doesn't pass in 10th grade, they don't take it again. It's only a one-time 10th grade, tell you where you're at that point in time.
Exactly.
And nothing else.
Right.
It's not a graduation requirement to pass.
Right, and it still isn't a graduation. But it's, in the past, for like, if you took it in 9th or 10th grade, you could take the biology one again if you wanted to.
Right. So you're going to take this once now, and there won't be a test in 9th or 11th grades. The plan right now is this is a 2-year stopgap. They're going to do this for this year and the following school year, and ultimately the state is hoping in year 3 to have a test that they can use as a college entrance exam, which they've been trying to get to, an 11th grade test. So going forward, this is the plan for this year and next year for the high schools.
And I think that this is also where, in the past, the governing board has talked about having, possibly using a more national test assessment, being the ACT or the SAT. So will we be having that discussion coming up as well?
We're not able to use the ACT for this purpose, because that was part of the denial of the waiver, was because schools did use ACT last year. And because of that, they've now made this mandate that every school has to give AZM2. So even if you're using an ACT, like we are in junior, you still have to give this 10th grade test.
Okay.
So
Whereas-
after 2 years, that may be an option.
It might be.
But they've not, the State Board of Education has not come to that decision yet, what that will look like.
Right.
Great. My other questions are, as you had mentioned I'll ask the general question. Do we know how the scattergram compares to years past? Was it very similar, or were there standouts this year where there was movement?
Good question. I have to go back and pull that. I did do it last spring and shared it with all the schools in here. I'll look at that and get back to you, but I don't have it in front of me right now.
Okay, all right, great. And then, With that, when you get that information, I'd be interested to know if any of the other schools are following the similar strategies, such as Redfield for ELA, because you highlighted Redfield. So I'm wondering if any other schools do those same things, but they just didn't get the same results, or trying to get a feel for identifying exactly what they're doing. And then is Redfield, did they have an opportunity to share with the other elementary schools what they're doing, and how do they do that? Is that through a Google Doc or
I'll let Dr. Guerin. I can talk a little bit about that. This summer, when the administrators came back, we had a 2-day all-admin meeting, and they were meeting in learning communities, and Dr. Bogna has been available all summer and had a lot of individual meetings with principals. So really getting into the weeds of the data, and then coming together as learning communities to talk about what really worked, what did you do differently, what did you notice. And those conversations are continuing to drive our continuous improvement plans at the site, and they're developing some common shared goals as learning communities as well. So this is ongoing work. And Dr. Bachna plans to visit again with the board and share some metrics data, and we'll also bring back some work in regards to what we're doing with this data. Tonight is really about presenting it to you, but there's so much behind the scenes happening, so we will circle back with that.
Okay, great, because that's what I think that we're really interested in is that information. We can read the data, we know we need to improve, and every year we're wondering, what is it that we can do? Where do we actually see that growth? And then can we duplicate it? Or if we can't, why can't we? And really try to have, because our parents in our community are very interested in knowing the hows and the whys.
Board Member Perleberg.
So first, thank you for kind of taking us there, because in the past we've had lots of conversations about how our district uses this data to drive instruction, improve instruction, and how that shifting culture of, rather than just thinking, oh, we don't want to just teach to these tests and that negativity around it, but actually trying to use this that's thrust upon us as a tool. And so I guess one of my questions, I'm not sure for who, but in the past we've developed data rooms in our schools. And so if we could even talk a little more about how this information goes into those data rooms and how our schools use that, I think would be great.
So the individual schools take their results, which they receive by student as well, and they begin to plot those out by grade level, by student, where each student performs on the ELA test and the math test, and at 4 and 8 at the science test. And then they plot that during the year based on the benchmark tests that we give at the end of each 9 weeks. So what we have done this year to ramp that up a bit is to focus on rigor and relevance in our administrative meetings. We started with the summer meeting. So Dr. Guerin and Dr. Hagegat, who led a team to go to the Model Schools Conference this summer, then led that team in instructing, taking that information and spreading it out among the rest of the principals. And so that's part of what they are doing in their monthly meetings when all the principals get together, is to continue to review where are they, and then in their individual complex meetings as well, they're doing that. And then of course this year we have a little extra emphasis on the Coronado complex with Margaret Cerna being there working with the Title I schools, because she did that so well at Tavan. And so she really knows it, she's lived it, she knows what it looks like from the first year that they did it to where they continued to tweak it until they have it a smooth running machine, just what they're looking for. So she is working with the other principals to bring that up. So all of that is going on, and that's, tonight we wanted to get the data out, because it's been there, and a couple of you have asked, where is it? So we wanted to get that out, and then when we come back with the presentation on the metrics, we're talking about October, the second meeting in October perhaps, because there's some data that we don't have yet that the metrics calls for. To hopefully give all of that and talk in a more extended way about all of these different projects and meetings and what's going on in the strategies at the schools.
Board Member Beckham?
It's been going on since my kids have been in the district, and that is, and it's still going on, and you can see it in the trends, is that third, fourth, fifth grade math is in ELA or, stellar, and just slowly starts to decline. I'd really love to hear a discussion on what is intentionally being done to try to raise that decline, because we're losing kids somehow in middle school and high school, so.
I think, that's a great question. It's something that I asked continually as a middle school principal, because whatever test we had in those days, everything from, probably nobody else remembers the math and English inventories, to the beginning of ASAP and then AIMS and so forth. There was always a middle school dip. And we were working so hard and still can't figure it out. And then I find out it's national. There are issues going on with kids that age that it's national. So the question then is, how do you overcome that? How do you be one district that exceeds those national dips and continuing to work on that? So that's a continual challenge that I know Dr. Guerin will work, and Dr. Sackos with the middle school principals for that dip. We know in the high schools, part of the problem has been that there's no reason to pass the tests at the high school level. High school kids get a little more savvy about that, and we've had this discussion last year as well. What do we do about high schools? And the idea was bring in a test that means something that's relevant to them. And now Arizona has been told as a state, no, you don't have that waiver, you can't do that. So now we continue with a test that may not be really all that valued to us. So
Although
But that would be true of any high school, sorry.
that's right, and it's
Any
true
high
across the
school,
state. Yeah.
Across the state, but yet some states seem to do better. And, I'm not a,
We did better when
standardized test
there
person
were
when I did.
scholarships tied to the result of that. You all remember that.
because the parents made sure the kids
Yeah.
did.
Well, and we'll have the ACT, so we'll be able to see and.
Right, we'll have the nationally normed
Towards that
ACT
national
test.
norm of
Absolutely.
what a high school student should be proficient in regarding math and ELA. So we'll be able to, and science.
Board Member Kravitz?
Did you mention what is a passing grade on the AIMS? Is it 65 and above, or is it like, a regular 100-point scale?
It's a 100-point scale. So average percent passing is average out of 100 points. So when I say that the rate is 78 out of 100%, so that's for fourth grade, that's,
So 78 is passing.
no, that's the average percent
Oh,
passing.
that's average.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know there's a particular number, I'd have to go back and look.
So the cut scores have been adjusted frequently?
Not on AZ Merit as much, the scale scores have stayed the same over time, but the average to get to a proficiency on AZ Merit is lower than it is on AIMS. It's probably about 53-54% to get to a proficiency. So it's a tougher test. It was leveled against other tests around the country when they put those cut scores on that back in 2015, and it was designed to be a difficult test. So AIMS science not probably quite as low as that. It's probably more in the 65% range, but I'd have to check with the science coach to verify that.
Any other questions? Board Member Greenberg?
This is more of a data collection question for Yavapai and Hohokam. Are those scores being kept separate for this year so that we're able to compare Yavapai
These
to
are last year's scores, so they're
Right,
separate.
but for this year, is the intention to analyze the Yavapai student scores?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
because we are keeping the enrollment of
Yeah.
those schools separate, so we know the
Okay.
students that are Yavapai students and the students that are local.
Perfect, thank you.
I have a question about our middle school math. So much has been discussed about middle school. You jogged my memory here about Algebra 1.
Okay.
So when these kids are testing now, and a lot of them come in and are not placed in 6th grade math, they're placed in 7th grade math. And they're testing with the 6th grade test though, right? Every time they skip a year, they're testing at grade level.
Right.
So I think that's decent factor, because while it's clear that they're supposed to know the fundamentals enough to do well on that, you don't teach to the test, so that if they've skipped that whole year and gone ahead, it's significant that they test at the grade level they're in. So,
I would say, I would expect our 8th grade math scores to actually go up this year with algebra, the algebra students no longer taking the Algebra 1 test. Because if you look at our chart up here, back in 2015, every 8th grader took the 8th grade math test, and those are our highest passing rates of that year. So now that we're adding those kids back into the general population, I'm kind of expecting their score is going to be higher on the 8th grade math going forward.
okay. And you had mentioned that we're using individual data regarding whether we're using that to, we're doing grade level goals, or I know that Redfield is, to speak to the actual grade levels, but we're using data to look at the individuals to see how they're moving along as well, right? To put interventions in place. Because I found it interesting when I looked at this to follow the cohort along.
Yes.
To look, because interestingly enough, math, when you started at your 7th grade cohort in 2015, they actually struggled in 7th and 8th and 9th grade, or 7th and 8th grade, and then they picked it up
Right.
in 9th, 10th, and 11th, that exact cohort. So that data is interesting, as well as dialed down to the individual level to see where we need to put some interventions in, maybe, and some
Absolutely.
support.
And the schools, they look at the cohort trends as well, and they
Okay.
come to me and we talk about that as well. So you're right, I know Dr. Creeker and I were looking at that too.
Okay.
So, and that's going to be different next year with all 8th graders taking the 8th grade test. The last several years, they take out the 8th graders that are taking algebra. So the top 10% are not in the 8th grade. So the 8th grade scores come down because you're missing your top 10%. Because they were taking the algebra test with 9th graders. Next year, regardless of whether they're taking algebra, geo-trig, or 8th grade math, they're going to take the 8th grade test. So we'll have all of the students, we'll have the brightest math students in 8th grade taking the 8th grade test. That's not the case the last several years. The brightest kids were taking the high school test and not taking the 8th grade test. So you're missing, you lopped off that top approximate 10%.
Kind of peculiar. I mean, to me, that's kind of like school districts that put their IB, no names used, put their accelerated programs at another school to try to raise all votes.
Right.
I mean, and it's great, and nothing against it, but if you really want to know what your students are learning,
Well, and I may be crazy,
I would rather
but
that we
didn't-
do what we're doing, but that's not what the.
I mean, they
state-
didn't ask us,
Yeah.
but.
Well, I may be crazy, but didn't they, maybe it was with Ames, didn't they used to do that?
Yes.
Yeah, they had to test on their grade level. There was
Yes.
no
They
option.
had to test on the
You're
grade
right.
level, they
Right.
couldn't test
There was no
the
choice.
ask whatever class. So they're
Absolutely.
going
Back
back
to
to
that.
that.
Yes.
And Ames
Okay,
is a 10th
for
grade
choice.
test. You're going back to a 10th grade test. It's really
Okay,
kind of like
right.
what you had
Yeah, I
before.
thought there was a reason they changed that, because they figured, why make a student go back 2 years and test,
Right.
and now they're, okay,
Who made this decision?
State Board of Education.
not us.
Well, I know it wasn't. That one we can't get blamed for, okay.
Any other questions?
On that point, we will be able to pull those students out to have comparisons for next year.
In terms of what?
In terms of when you're looking at the data, so that it's not just skewed and you go, oh, we jumped 20 points.
We could. We
You'll
can
be
see
able
which
to pull
kids are
that
in
out
Algebra
and be
1 that
able
took the-
to
you
know,
could.
because you go student by student.
You do,
cohort.
yes.
So
You could,
we'll be
yes.
able to tell what's going on.
And I also think we have multiple measures of data that we use, not just this data. This is an important piece of the puzzle. But as Dr. Bachna said, we have benchmark data, formative assessments, so it's all creates a picture.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we move now to our discussion item 4B, discussion on the superintendent search process and timeline, and appropriately, Dr. Creekard.
Thank you, President Beckman, members of the board. So we've been asked to help you begin a conversation about running a search for my successor. So there are a couple of issues. I think I would like to start with the discussion of the search firm, because you have a couple of options, and give us some guidance, and then based on that guidance, we will come back with an action item at the next board meeting, possibly. So last year, we did a RFP or an RFQ and decided on contracting with McPherson Jacobson out of Nebraska. They came in and did their search, set up with you, with the then board, what the timeline was to be, what the process looked like. At the end of the search, as a board, that board then suspended the search at that point and decided to ask me to stay another year, which we agreed to. Since then, we have had conversations with members of that firm who have said a couple of things. They've said, first of all, they were also not satisfied with the results of the search, and they would offer for the remainder. We spent, of the $36,900, we spent approximately $21,000 on that part of the search. They have said that they will only charge the remainder, the $15,000 that remain on that original contract to run another search this year. Granted, they would not have to do all of the community meetings. They just did them last year. They have that data. They could do something in an abbreviated form, whatever. They have also specified that the two people that would be the leads on this are Dr. Steve Joel and Dr. Mary Kammersall, who came in maybe a little bit later last year, who are acting superintendents of great repute. And so that it would be a little different from how last year's looked like. They would also, and we would, those of us that have been through this before would recommend, there isn't the same sense of urgency to get it done before winter break as there was last year. The normal time for these searches are that the winter break is a time when sitting superintendents begin to look at positions, start thinking about whether or not to move or not. And so I would recommend that we would look at an end date of late February or early March, and then work back, applications due just after the first of the year, and follow that process. But if you would choose to continue with that firm to run that part of the process, Dr. Joel has said that he would come out at the next meeting if you decided to do that, at the next meeting, if you wanted to discuss the particulars with him, he himself would come out. The other option is that we put out an RFQ and see what else is out there for firms. Last year, one of the reasons I believe that you chose McPherson Jacobson was because their price was lower, and we were conscious of doing another search and so forth. So I would expect that we would not be able to beat with a new RFQ that $39,600, $40,000 rate, let alone $15,000 that we would be getting. But that's a decision for you. I'd like to kind of throw those options out there and those items for discussion and see what you're thinking.
Board Member Kravitz?
For me, one of the reasons that I was interested in working with them initially was we had never, I believe as a district, worked with them. Had we? Not yet. You would know better than anybody, Sandra, who we'd worked with. So that was initially appealing to me. I think the price, there may have been some that were similar, but we'd worked with some of the other firms that we had heard from. I mean, you've told me what they've said would be different, but I'm kind of torn because we've spent a certain amount of money with them. We didn't get the result that we were hoping for. And that was also at the direction of the CEO or president of the company. So while we have this contract still out there and there's some money remaining, I'm like, well, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. So I'm kind of torn as to which direction to go. Because I'm not quite sure, you know, I'm concerned about the outcome again.
Any other comments or questions?
Barbara, are you going to add anything to the conversation? We were the three that were there, so I'm just going to ask. You don't have to, you can say
That's
no or
why we
not,
are-
but I'm
we
just
were.
curious if you are, and then I will.
All right, I will agree with Board Member Kravitz. You know, the concern is, yes, it's a great deal. Are we gonna get exactly, you know, what we got last time? That's the question, but I understand that fiscally it makes sense. They were involved in in the district, in the meetings already. That means they would get up to speed fairly quickly. That's a bonus. I mean, I think there's a lot of factors that are kind of six one way, half dozen the other, depending on how you look at them. So I would say too that whatever else I think administration could share that they feel may, you know, tip the scales in one direction or not would be very helpful.
So while we can't speak to specific performance, because we can just talk about the search itself, correct? I will tell you, outside looking in, it appears to most people, including myself, that the outcome was a result of the abbreviated time frame and it being rushed and et cetera. So if there is parameters in which we can discuss, not necessarily here or whatever, that give way to a different frame of mind, specifically as to that not being the reason, I'm all ears. I don't know if we can do it here. We may have to go into some sort of exec session at some point, because this is a big deal, obviously, because you get what you pay for. And this may be, you know, less cost, but I want to make sure it's the right approach and we don't just, you know, throw more money in a direction that may not yield us what we're hoping for. Board Member Greenberg, did you have a question?
Anything else? I would agree with the board president that the public perception, based on the public meetings of the board, was that a timeline was presented that was cut significantly in order to allow the existing board to select the semifinalists, because pulling from those meetings, there was a feeling that the new board members were not competent to help search.
That's
for-
probably a poor choice of word.
We're going to be too busy with too much other stuff to be able to, well, I don't know how else to put it, but that's how I'll put it. I think this is the single most important decision a board of directors can make, is choosing a CEO who's the right fit for an organization. It is. I mean, that is by our board policy, by state law, by in private companies, publicly traded companies. It's the most important job we have. And I think we all agree that rushing this decision, regardless of headhunting, but rushing a timeline and putting something through is a significant mistake. And my only concern with working with McPherson Jacobson on the existing contract, or working with anybody, is that there are things that I believe we should do in that process to make it a very strong process in accordance with best practice from other states. You know, I have contacted other states. I have obtained their search processes and their guidance and looked at them. I have read probably close to 100 articles now about CEO selection and the processes that people use. For example, do we want to have an ad hoc board committee with people who are experts in this field, like, other who have done CEO selections before, that aren't just from the headhunters or anything, but do we want to have a committee that puts together the very specific needs that we have to have in a superintendent? I'm not just talking about the general needs that we always say we need, someone who's smart and who's been doing this forever, but I mean identifying what are the core needs of this organization, what are the critical capabilities we need in a CEO in order for us to continue and be successful moving forward. So do we need that committee to identify the pivot of those credentials? Are we looking for someone who has very strong business acumen, who's good with internal management and accountability? Is that the key thing that we need to move this district forward? In the semifinalist screening, or when we choose the finalists, do we want to have a finalist day where we invite those individuals and maybe their spouses, as other districts do, to come for the day to the school and meet and have meet? Well, you didn't do that because you didn't choose anybody.
That was
my
part
point,
of
but
what
my
we were
point
going
is,
to do as
I
part of
just,
our search.
if I can finish, please, because I'm speaking. If, do we need to have a semifinalist panel? How do we want to do that? So I think, there are very important things that, regardless of who our headhunter is, that we need to set out. How do we want this process to work? Do we have enough direction to even tell a headhunter or a search firm what we are looking for? And that's, that's part of the timeline, and that's part of what we're expecting and what we can do with the existing contract that we have. And I don't know the full scope of that contract and everything that they're willing to do, especially because, it is $15,000. So, that's the key, in my view, of this entire question.
Are we going to have, sorry, just.
That's okay.
Mac and Jake McPherson Jacobson come in and discuss with us before, even, I would assume,
They can.
what, we kind of revisit, as you talked about the process, and if we wanted to change the process and what the scope would be with this remaining amount, or, let us know if it would be exactly the same as far as the process they would use, or would we be able to make it a little bit more flexible to our needs now, or I'm just curious if that's something that we may want.
They are willing to do that, if you'd like.
Okay, just curious. Board Member
I just
Evans?
wasn't sure if you were familiar with the contract or the outline that McPherson Jacobson had sent us, because much of what you discussed was in what their role is as the search firm. So if you haven't, you may want to get a copy of that and review it. And that may be helpful to you. And to Patty, I don't know if you've looked at it either.
I watched the meetings, but it's
Yeah,
good to
but there was
revisit.
there was a packet that they gave us that outlined some of the things they said they were going to do. Well, I don't want to get on the wrong side of Michelle, so I'll be careful what I say. But that may be helpful to look at both that packet.
Board Member Perleberg?
And I do, since you brought up President Beckman, as far as, the outsider's perspective, appreciate that, understood. And I'd ask my fellow board members that were there also to correct me if I'm wrong or validate what I'm saying, certainly at the time. And I think we would need to understand those expectations, especially if McPherson is chosen. And I know that I did receive, as far as I felt as a board member, the information that by fall, early winter, especially in a high-profile position such as SUSD superintendent, you were going to get those candidates early. And especially since our needs kind of are at the higher level, you would also be finding, and I felt at the time that's what we were seeing, other districts were hiring. They were announcing that they had hired superintendents as we were getting our search rolling. So there's kind of two lenses to look for it. I don't think anyone's really eager to rush through, but there is that other lens that we were seeing at the time that did feel like pressure, a little higher. But they may come back in and kind of give a different lens. That's possible too.
Board Member Greenberg?
If I recall, there was a single school in Houston which hired a superintendent in September of 2018. So every single piece of guidance, everything that I've read, which is a lot, supports what Dr. Creekard just stated, which is that the optimal time to begin that search and announce that you're going to be looking for that and putting together the application process is earlier, but it is generally the October, November, early winter, that time, and I don't see any reason. I mean, no one has presented a reason not to follow all of that guidance, so.
So my opinion, I just think I would like to hear from them personally, because I think it's difficult for me to hold them accountable for those results when they're not weighing in. You may have heard from them, but I have not. And I would like to hear if they felt handcuffed by it, or if they felt that it was fine and they just couldn't get the candidates. I don't know. I think it's something I'd like to hear from them and be able to ask them questions about it as well. Board Member Beckham?
This is it's a difficult topic to talk about because performance is so much about what we're deciding on, right? Mm-hmm. And I appreciate you being candid. I can tell you from my perspective of being in those meetings, I felt that what you just talked about, we as a board discussed with the search firm and with the other search firms when we were doing the RFQ. So we knew what was expected when you go into a search. And those items, except for actually creating an ad hoc committee, that wasn't talked about. But we felt instead of a committee, we would be going out to the community to be getting the input of what they were looking for, because we have a very vocal and active community, instead of using a smaller committee. So I want to just in a way assure you that what you've talked about was discussed by the board and with the search firm. As far as timeline, the only difference in the timeline of what we would be doing now, because when you back into it, even if you have making a decision in February or March, as you had mentioned, is that you instead of having a December 11th application due date, you're just moving it so that those applicants have winter break when school's off, because it's going to be January 7th or whatever date that first week is chosen. And so but you're still posting November, December, just like we would be posting. And so the only, as you term it, rush, which we didn't feel was a rush, we actually felt that there was some value in discussing, whether it was in January or it was December, that it would benefit this district to have it done, and the students, and have it done in December. And I know we'll have a difference of opinion there, and we can, and that's fine. But I want you to know, if when you really look at it, the process is not any different than what we most likely, whether we go with McPherson or we go with another firm, because as you said, there's best practices and standards out there. And what we found when we did the RFQ was they pretty much were all alike, right? It came down to personality, it came down to references, which then I will go to now. I do have a very strong opinion. I was in those meetings. It wasn't just the president that was in the meetings. We met individually with the superintendents. They were well aware of what our fit was. As they said, they felt they understood what we wanted. I don't feel that the candidates that they brought met that. And at any point, I did not hear one of them say to us, "We're sorry, hey, the pool just wasn't what you think." What I heard was, "We've got 4 great candidates. Any of them will be great for you." Mm-hmm. And that is why I have concern using this firm. So I definitely have reservations. I
personally don't need to talk to them again, although I would be interested to see what changed. Because that will tell me something about their character too, and how they do business. But that is my feeling there, and so that you know where I stand. Here's the next item I want to do. When we talk about cost, part of that cost, we chose this from not just because they were the least amount. And they still do, I'm sure, have a very good reputation. I think that they're qualified for what they do. I think we have a very difficult, we have out of the box of what we are looking for in our superintendent. And I think that is difficult, and may be difficult for any firm. And that's where I agree with you, we need to be asking some really pointed questions to get to the point where we know exactly, they know what our community is looking for. Because I continue to think they're qualified and that they can help districts. And on the cost. We've done a lot of that upfront information, so I am wondering are we planning on then, even if we pick a different firm, are we thinking we're still going to go out and do community meetings when we have all that information? So even if we use a different firm, it may be less than what we think, because we don't have to do that whole beginning part that we did with our communities to know what they're looking for. We may need to refine it a little bit to better communicate it, but I think we do know what we're looking for in it. And we need, obviously, the input of our two board members.
And I would argue that we do need at least one. We have new families to
Well,
our
and we
district.
didn't have as many community meetings. I think there was an understanding there were going to be more community meetings than we had. I think they were either all in the morning or all in
They're
the
all in the
evening.
evening, and it was
And we
winter, and
thought there were
yeah.
going to be some that were going to be in the morning. But I don't want to get into too many specifics and rehash old information.
Right. And they're still going to be in the winter. They're going to be in the same time period, so that's not changing either, just so you know.
Without
because
getting
the
into
postings
the
number,
specifics of what went on, there's some very pointed things that I could put my finger on. Those meetings were put out in 1 week and then advertised in 1 week, and then it was winter and they expected to show up, because I know I went to them. So I don't, if I'm out of bounds, please let me know, because you said something that was pivotal, which was that in your estimation, they brought you candidates that they thought fit our needs.
They did.
And that at any given time, they never said, and if I'm out of bounds, please tell me, they never gave you any indication that they could have gotten more, or maybe the pool wasn't as great as they thought it was going to be because the time frame was crunched. Because I've always understood that to go the search in the fall, narrow it down, people apply over winter, and then you make your narrowing down in the spring, because the superintendents really want to be still loyal to where they are, not necessarily put the word out that they're applying until later. So they never give you any indication that.
Because, and you understand the timeline you said is not what we will be experiencing. It's not what Dr. Creekard just said. Dr. Creekard said we would still have the application deadline the 1st of January. That means the posting is still November,
Right.
December.
Right.
And so they are still going to let their school, the school districts
The
know.
finalists
in
would be
January.
Many,
It's still
many,
a
many
file.
candidates ask not to be named until they are a finalist. So
Right,
they're not
that's
letting
going to
them.
be in January.
Yeah.
And then that
I would just go so far as to say, I was told your pool's not going to change after the holidays.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was told
That's
that.
what
Right, we were told that.
Just so you know.
Board Member Greenberg.
I think there are two points there. One, with candidates, it is obviously possible that the search firm is a bad fit for us, or didn't quite grasp or knew what we wanted and still presented bad candidates. That's certainly
Not
the
bad
case.
candidates,
Or
just
just
not-
candidates
they
who
didn't
weren't
fit.
the right
Appropriate
fit.
candidates.
At the same time, it is equally possible that we did not set out a clear enough description in our own heads and in the minds of McPherson Jacobson and to potential applicants of specifically the needs that we had to target and what was critical. Those are both possible. And even though we think things are clear, I mean, obviously I didn't apply and I didn't look at the application, but you know, the board president and I'm sure we both have watched the meetings and everything. I could not tell you, having not looked at the application, and maybe that's the only place where it was, but from the board discussions, I could not tell you what it is that you were looking for. I mean, other than someone who, I guess, could withstand political pressures and things. But, and I think, you know, that really is such an important thing to set out clearly and succinctly. What are those key traits that we need, that you need to be able to demonstrate, that McPherson Jacobson knows they need to find, or whoever we're working with, needs to find in those candidates. And at the same time, maybe you did do that and it didn't work out. It's really hard to judge, because based on the public meetings, I personally don't know. You know, I couldn't synthesize it down into anything that was that specific. I mean, I know we have our general qualifications and the things we look for, and, you know, we have these issues within our administration currently, and we need somebody to clean it up. But I mean, that's only a small portion of it. The second thing I point out, I don't know who the candidates were, what their backgrounds were. Is it my understanding that the state of Arizona does not require you to have a CEO who's got a superintendent's degree or anything?
correct.
Right, so I mean, I don't know how broad you guys search. I mean, I would think, and maybe you guys search very broadly, maybe it was open generally to everybody, but, you know, our pool of candidates, for any number of reasons, and something we should talk to if we have that meeting with the headhunting firm or anyone that we go out with an RFQ on, is, you know, what are the qualifications that we want, but, you know, can we find people who can grow into the role, who have a lot of experience in certain things? Do we want to look at people, you know, we should make it as broad as possible, in other words, to get applicants within the industry, outside the industry, within our own team, within our own district, who might not be at the director level yet or at the chief executive level, but somebody. So I don't know the parameters of everything, and that might be something to talk about. And, you know, maybe the way it was set up, maybe they just didn't get a big pool, or I just don't know.
Would you like to address this?
I'll
Allison?
address
Rebecca, yeah.
Just so, and we can get you the information so that you can see it. Everything that you just spoke about, we had discussion, lengthy discussion on. So we have that information. Most likely, the qualification, I don't know if that was in public, but I do know when we met with the firm, and I don't know if it was individually, we talked about just what you said. What is it that the board, do we want to go outside? Do we want to look at somebody who doesn't have a certification? Do we want certification? That whole discussion did take place. And then a decision was made. And so we can share that with you so that you'll feel much more comfortable once we get you that information.
Board Member Perleberg.
And I would add, thank you for saying all that. And Dr. Creekard, of course, was there with us as well. And I know certainly at the time, we appreciated the leadership and history and expertise that he brought into this. Would obviously welcome any, you know, additional advice, but also the leadership and guidance that you brought to us back then. We would obviously love to have this time around as well.
And I believe you brought guidance as well to McPherson Jacobson, telling them.
Well, and if we do meet with them, sorry if I'm going to cut you off, I just pointedly want to say, make me a believer. What would you do different now than you did before, given the same parameters? And if those parameters were inhibiting you to find the right candidates, tell me what you would require, and then I would like to make a decision regarding that. I mean,
So
simple enough.
first of all, to be clear, my only stake in this is the end result. I don't care how you get there. I hope you have the right person to carry on what I believe are some significant things that we've done, and that the community and the staff expects. I think it would be, personally, I think it would be fair to them, and we don't owe them anything. It would be fair to them to hear what they have to say, what would be different. Shortly after the search, I had a conversation with Dr. Joel. He called me again, I think this summer, finding out what's going on. I called him prior to this meeting, so he knew that we were going to be discussing it. I thought that was fair to him. So in trying to be fair to somebody who has a stake and who would like, I get the sense, would like to prove themselves. But in the end, they have to prove themselves to you and then make a decision whether you want us to go out with an RFQ or go with him. We'll do either one. And we are in a good time frame now, I believe. If you look at the contract that was signed with them last year, it was late in September, and we're early, so we're ahead of that. We're in I think, a good place for that decision-making. So we can, I think I could get one or both of their people to be here on the 17th, if you would like, at the regular board meeting, but give me that direction, or we can start the process for an RFQ.
And I would just add to Board Member Greenberg's question about the contract. If there are things that aren't in the existing contract, we can work out terms with them. Once we know what you as a board want, we can talk to them about that, and likely will not have a problem getting an updated contract to cover what you want for what's left, or, yeah, for what's left.
Board Member Beckham.
I really am interested in what you researched and found out. So if you wouldn't mind, I think maybe a narrative to give to Dr. Kriegard about best practices, and then he can share it with all of us so that we can kind of be all on the same page. I think that might be helpful too.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Okay, Board Member Greenberg?
Go
So
ahead.
I think there are 2 points, 3, I would say in my mind. The first is, do we want them to come to the meeting? The second one is there any sense, and I don't know the procurement process well enough, but is there any sense in starting a procurement process now in case we decide at that meeting after speaking with them that we don't want to move forward, then we're not starting the procurement process
2 weeks later.
2 weeks later? I don't know if that's a bad move.
I don't think it has a lot of significance. We can run that RFQ within a couple of week time frame. It's not a major time consumer.
Right. Well, yeah, only because, as you just said, the contract with them was signed in late September. I don't know if we lose. So that's just one thing. If the advice is we shouldn't do that, that's fine. If the board agrees, that's, I don't have an issue. And the third thing is, what do we want to do anything as a board ourselves in preparing for this search? Do we want to have that ad hoc committee, something that we can bring in, I don't know. So I think those in my mind are the 3
Okay.
topics.
My 2 cents, at least on the last 1 or 2 points, is, first of all, you're a committee of 5. I can see a board of directors that are 25 wanted an ad hoc committee, but a board of 5, personally, I wouldn't recommend. I think you all have a heavy stake into this process and the outcome, and you are only 5, number 1. And then number 2, we can resurrect the documents from the meetings and bring them and share them so everybody gets a chance to see them prior to the next meeting and get that to you so you can all review that and see what was discussed and what came out and what went to them, so you have an idea, and then look at it, and if you want to change some of those things, you would have that opportunity with whoever you worked with. But you can hit the ground running just as you said they could. If we went with them, somebody else could go. Either way could build on the work that was done last year.
Board Member Beckham.
So I just want to understand this process because I know it's a little awkward. So they're going to possibly come at our regular board meeting and stand up and say, this is kind of what our new contract would be? Because, there's not really going to be an interaction, as there probably shouldn't, and then we're going to make a decision based upon that one-sided conversation? Or should it be smaller I don't know. Or do we?
Whatever you would like. I mean,
I find
there's not
that
an issue with having an information item.
very
with-
awkward having them get up and saying that, and then we're supposed to discuss and make it. It kind of is in the same situation we're in right now.
Dr. Creekard, you said you didn't have a chance to connect with them before today?
I did.
Oh, you did, okay. I'm just wondering if the board wouldn't like you to do some of that background work with them based on what you're hearing from board members now, report out to the board, see what kind of other questions that might evoke, to help us get ready for a meeting where they would actually come here and answer your questions, to give a little bit of run up to that. And maybe the 17th is too early. I don't, you're
So
talking
here's-
October, November, so we're running out of that time.
Right, so I looked at it like they would come, have information discussion item where they just said, this is what we would do. We would ask questions just, objectively, again, and then, I mean, if I'm understanding you correctly, is then what? Like, do we vote on, do we have them, we vote that night, or do we kick it off to October, and is that too late, or is that what you're?
Well,
kinda-
right, plus, it just understanding too, it's a kind of a one-way conversation at that point too, right? Which is fine,
No,
but.
wouldn't
No.
have to be.
Questions? I certainly would ask them questions. I mean.
I mean, you guys asked tough questions when they were here before.
Yeah.
Yes, but now it's almost like they're put on the spot, hey,
Well,
some of us don't feel like you performed, and now, I don't know, it seems very awkward.
But I think they might be prepared for that as a result of what Dr. Creekard is telling us.
Conversation.
When I look at it like they're trying to earn our business again. They would want to get in front of us, and it may be awkward, but they would welcome, I would think, the opportunity to
Voice their
to
side.
earn it again and say, we could have done maybe a better job here, and we would do this time around. We would be respectful in our questioning, of course, but, you can do that, get to the bottom of things without it.
And we could post it as possible action, so that you're not bound, you don't have to vote, but if you're ready to, if you feel you are ready to, you can, or we table it to the next meeting if there's more things that you want to hear about, or if you're not quite so sure.
And I would add,
Sounds
I
nice,
assume
comfortable.
going into exec would also always be an option.
Not to ask them questions.
Not to ask them questions, but
if you guys-
possibly for us to discuss.
Legal advice
Legal
on
advice.
the contract, or, yeah, pretty much that.
Maybe we go, by some,
Okay.
It's not going to be business
Right.
question.
Unless we scheduled a specific executive session item to discuss performance.
On the existing contract?
Yeah.
For legal advice?
No, I mean, I'm saying
Yes,
unless we
that's
scheduled,
Awkward.
I mean, how
And that's
did you discuss the
I don't
performance
think-
last
yeah.
time? So I don't
Well, it's
understand,
the
how could you have
existing
discussed it in
contract.
private, then now we're not allowed to discuss it in
Last
private?
time the executive session that we're talking about, where the board met with them, was on the actual selection of the finalist candidates, which was allowed.
Right. Okay, so there is no way to discuss, so the answer is there's no way to discuss their performance other than in public.
Unless you want to talk about their performance on the contract in terms of legal advice as to that.
Right.
Did they perform on the contract?
Right. But they're
But no,
general,
yes.
general performance questions of,
Yeah.
I think you guys suck. I'm not saying anything to say that, but my point is, I think you guys suck, is, that's
There's
not
no
legal
exception.
advice,
You're gonna
right?
say-
There's no
correct.
exception.
But in an open meeting and an information item, you can ask, what would you do differently this time?
Right.
What do you propose?
Right.
How do you propose to bring this to a successful
Right.
conclusion?
Right. But I was just pointing out the extreme version,
Right.
that
No exception.
there's no exception
That was
for that.
extreme.
Yeah.
Board
Well,
Member Curliburn.
So the idea of having a possible action for them as well as a possible action for an RFQ. The same meeting, right?
do it
Is that
that
what
way.
we're looking at?
Sure.
Okay.
And your next meeting after that is October 1, so we're still early October if you need to push it one more meeting.
Okay, any further comments, discussion, questions? No? Okay, thank you. Moving on to discussion item 4C, bond project update from January 2019 to August 2019. And we have Mr. Rayler, right?
For the record, Mr. Rayler is Director of Building Services.
That's right. I was going to introduce myself, but thank you, Dr. Creekard. Good evening, members of the board, President Beckman, Dr. Creekard. As always, it's great being up in front of you guys. Today, I have brought with me a few folks that have come on board in the last couple of months to help with our bond projects. We started down the path at one point with a project management company at 1 to 2 and upwards of 3% of bond projects. Seemed a little steep, so then we tried hiring a specific bond project manager. That didn't pan out for us. So I came up with the idea of let's get some interns, let's get some folks in here that are going to learn the industry through college. We've got some very talented folks, even at our high school level, and so I'd like to introduce you to some folks. Dan Collinsworth is our assistant project manager. He's a graduate student at ASU in the School of Construction Management. He's currently assigned to be the project manager at Navajo Elementary's Restoration and Rebuild. William Klescher, who's not here today, he's actually at school, is going to be the assistant project manager. He's serving a little bit different role. He's studying accountancy, so he's watching our books. Instead of being out there in the field, he's doing a very important role of making sure all of our money is being kept track of. And he's a junior at ASU, W.P. Carey School of Business, majoring in accountancy, runs a nonprofit organization that collects new and used baseball equipment and distributes it to youth across Arizona. Very bright young man. And he is a Desert Mountain, product of Desert Mountain High School. Then we've got Theo Altnew. He is one of our facilities interns, comes live from Chaparral High School. We interviewed 5 young men from our high schools to do these high school interns, and I don't know that I've sat with a brighter group of people ever, adults included. These young men were fantastic, and I picked the 2 brightest that I could find. I have to put my sunglasses on every time I see them. Theo is heavily invested in robotics and engineering, and I think he's undecided at this point where he's going to go to college. Next up is Gatlin Farrington. He's a senior at Chaparral High School. He's president of the robotics team and will be studying cybersecurity at ASU in the fall. And then, almost last but not least, Alice Sipos is our administrative assistant in the department. She wrote down some other stuff. I'm gonna say that she came to us from retirement from the city of Scottsdale. She's got a accounting background, but she's married. She has a daughter named Haley. Enjoys kayaking, playing tennis, softball, and working on my calendar on a daily basis. And then, last but not least, the old dude on the end, Greg Skelton. Greg is a 39-year employee, probably the single most dedicated, hardworking, knowledgeable in his field. He is an outstanding employee that Scottsdale is so fortunate to have. So this year I came up with a new award. It's just, I couldn't do it without you award. And so, and then of course, Dr. Creekard and the team have this challenge coin, and so I'd like to present that to Greg.
Like you all know, I started when I was
Go ahead, have a seat. Okay, so every once in a while, I like to get up in front of you and give you a little rundown of what we've got going on. And we got a lot going on. And so this report is just from January till now. We had to pick a time. We had to, when we did our search in Smartsheet, we had to put some parameters on it. And so we've identified all of the projects that we've started, finished, still have in kickoff mode throughout the district. So I'm gonna take this off the screen, put the PowerPoint up, let it kind of run by itself while I jabber on. Oopsie. Okay, so we'll circle back to the slideshow. It's going to just kind of run by itself, and you can admire the pictures. So looking at the item itself, the agenda item itself, you'll see that there's about 50 projects on there that we've started and finished or are still in progress. To the tune of $15.8 million. This does not include the rebuilds. It does not include the Cheyenne project. Those projects were actually kind of finished before that, but we still had some financial commitments that we closed out really in this year. The last payment that we made to Core Construction was in June for the Hopi and Pima project. So that's why down at the bottom I've shown the three projects, Pima, Hopi, and Cheyenne. Those are really just to kind of tie them up in a bow. This is what we've spent. There's been a lot of conversation about 22 million, 21 million, and the reality is the total spend at Pima was 19,083,888. That is bond and adjacent ways money. Hopi was 20,285,569. Again, bond and adjacent ways money. And then Cheyenne at 8,774,352. Again, bond and adjacent ways money. So when you look at the work that we've been doing from January until now, you'll see that we've got the original budget, the budget that was put together in 2015-2016 for this list of projects was $15,895,000. And to date, under contract, we've got $8,720,000 of that $15,008,000. So thankfully, we're running under budget on a lot of the projects. You'll see that some of them are a little bit over budget, but generally speaking, when you look at Coronado High School's roof, that was originally budgeted for $4.7 million, and we got that one at $1,044,000.
Wow.
So that one's not done. It's not entirely done because we do have some other roofs, but we're gonna kind of milk those a little bit to make sure that we take advantage of any warranty that Carlisle has for that. But all of the solar is off the roof. Everything is all buttoned up on the first two roofs that we awarded. And so we're looking good. Amy Palatucci's back there. She didn't put a knife in my back or anything, so I assume that this weekend's storms, we survived. And so I think there was one small leak in the corner of the gym building, and that was the one corner that they hadn't quite finished, but they finished it today. So there's other bigger projects all the way down at the end, Redfield Elementary, the structure, shade structure and playground improvements. They had that budgeted originally at $2.2 million, and to date we've spent or contracted $353,000. I don't see us spending a whole lot more money on that one. So there's there's almost $5 million right there that we've been able to recover on these projects that were originally budgeted at a much, much higher amount. So I'm going to open it up to questions because I know that you guys always have some, and I want to make sure that they get answered. So, questions?
Any questions from board members?
What, oh, is there?
Board Member Kravitz?
Oh, sorry. Is there a date, or a target date for the roof at Coronado to be complete?
So the roof that we originally awarded is done as of today.
Oh.
So we're going to do, we did an initial punch list walk with the manufacturer on Friday, and they're going to be back again next week to do the final. But again, that was the first two roofs. It was the two biggest roofs.
Right.
We still have the auditorium and others, but we're going to wait and not throw our money at it. We're going to wait and see if that roof starts to come apart like the other one, so that they're paying for it and not us.
Right.
We only paid for about a fifth of the roof. The rest of it was done under warranty through Carlisle.
Oh, right, okay.
Okay?
Okay.
That's a quick question.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you sure? You want it?
Yeah, no,
Board Member
Okay.
mine's just a
All right.
simple question.
I hope I phrase this properly. So we have $15.8 million for kind of what you call the other projects besides the rebuild,
Uh-huh.
correct?
Like,
Life cycle, thank you, that is the word. How far along, and you can just tell me, there's no way for you to know this. If you don't, that's totally understandable. How far along would you say we are in accounting for the budget of the things we need to do? I mean, trying to set aside that life cycle budget and then what we will have for the rebuilds of that 15.8 million. I mean, I'm sure the list could go on forever if we wanted to, but as far as expenditures that we did plan on using for this bond, how much more does that budget need to grow to cover those things?
So there's kind of 5 different pots.
Okay.
Life cycle is one of them. Safety and security is another one. School environment's another one. School environment's not one that we really talked about much at all. That has about $20 million set aside in it. We've only done some of the work at Cheyenne out of school environment. Tavon's on the list for school environment. So with 8 million, this 8 million is representation of just this last 6 months. So when you look back another year and a half, in addition to that, I would say we're probably about 40% spent on our other than rebuilds.
Okay.
So we've still got plenty of room to grow. And when you look at this list in the last 6 months, and we've spent just over 50% of what was actually budgeted, we're in really good shape. So there's going to be a time where we come back and say, okay, we've completed the list, and here's all the things we want to do in addition to the list. So there's been some little projects, little things that when you look at the agenda item itself, and you see some of these that it shows a budget of 0, those were things that weren't necessarily on the list, weren't identified, but they're things that either go in line with another project or they just needed to be done. So they're being done to make sure that we meet the needs of the district.
Thank you.
Board Member Beckham?
And I'm just going to follow up to make sure that we have this correct, because I want to give the correct information to the public. We kind of piped in and said, oh, it's life cycle, but as you had said, it's actually more than life cycle.
Right.
This includes life cycle, safety, security, because we have safety and security in there, and then some other items. So I just want to be
Yes.
clear and correct. on
You're
that.
absolutely right. There are life cycle, you'll see the security cameras, the admin lobby remodels, portions of those are part of safety and security. So, yes, it's a
Right, I just-
representation of a lot of the different pots of money.
Right, and in case people are looking strictly at those pots and understand them, I wanted to make sure that
Correct.
we corrected that. And then the question I had is, once again, just one of, housekeeping. So the contracts that awarded here, those contracts were awarded from January, I'll just use 2019 forward. They
Yes.
weren't awarded before that.
Correct.
Okay. And then I just have an ask that I know I asked, and I still would like to have it there because it just helps show the picture, and especially because there were just as many questions regarding the athletic fields as there were the rebuilds. So if we could just add the athletic fields to that chart that you have where it says school rebuild, school environment projects.
Sure.
If that's possible.
Yep.
I think that these items were not done prior to January 9th, 2019 anyway, so adding that just kind of closes the picture. And I don't know if there's any other projects that should be added, but just to have closure on that dollar amount in one area, I think is helpful for a community who
Sure.
might
Yeah, we
still be
can-
questioning it.
We can report that out.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Because I liked the chart. I
A
thought
side
it was easy to
note
read. Mm-hmm.
on the athletic fields, the first three that were done, it was value engineered out, all the water cannons, the pump stations and the water cannons. And that was if I remember correctly, about $180,000 per school that they saved. We've now done that work at about $73,000 per school. So doing it individually and not having the general contractor wrapped up in it, we did save a significant amount of money. So everywhere we
learn.
turn, we're trying to save a few bucks.
Dennis, a quick question on the life cycle / school environment things. How did you determine the prioritization? I mean, I'm not asking about the past necessarily, but how are you determining what you're doing next?
So two things, two resources that are my primary is my staff, because they're out there working on it every single day. And then secondarily is the FMG report, the life cycle report that was done. So those are the two primary resources that we use. And then secondarily, it was my instructions 18 plus months ago, let's get the life safety and security stuff done. And we've had our bumps and bruises along the way, getting an architectural firm assigned, doing all that. But we're finally heading down that path, and we're on target to wrap up all of the front office remodels to improve security by the end of next summer. The IT department has taken on a huge burden by doing all of the cameras in-house, and they've come back to you a couple of different times now to get their budgets approved. And so they've been doing all of that work. You saw in one of the slides, many of the schools have already been done. And then they also have been doing the card access points. So there was an incident at Laguna sometime last year. We decided, hey, these schools that aren't going to get done right away, let's put some kind of stopgap measure in to make sure those schools are protected. So they did card access at some of the schools where, at the very least, you can't go out that door unless you've been invited to go out that door onto campus. So the IT department has been huge in getting a lot of that work done. And so we're looking forward to a nice busy year where'd they go? Oh. with a great new crew.
Board Member Greenberg.
I just wanted to understand what you just said about the fields you're doing at the schools. The fields that you're referencing, were those the like football and track fields at Arcadia High School and everything that when you say the first three?
The first three were Saguaro, Coronado, and Chaparral.
And you're saying that now doing it the way you're doing, instead of spending 180 on average, you're now spending about 75 on average?
So the Saguaro, Chaparral, Coronado projects were done not under my watchful eye. And those were, you know.
Contracted.
So they're beautiful fields, but they didn't get the water cannons because we were over budget. So when we did Arcadia, I did that one differently. Just brought in a civil engineer for the design, didn't have an architectural firm do the design. That design was about $66,000 versus $174,000. We cut out some middlemen along the way, streamlined the project, and ended up saving about $180,000 from budget, including water cannons, including some other nifty features at Arcadia. So Arcadia was done separately, but now we've got the voices in our ears at Saguaro, Coronado, and Chaparral asking us where are the water cannons. So we revisited those projects, and that's where we saved the money from the 180 that we had pulled out of the project and did the water cannons separately.
Perfect, thank you so much.
Any further questions from board members? Okay, thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.
Okay, we now go to our information and discussion item 4D, revisions to policies BBBA, board member qualifications BEDF, voting method, and LBD/LBDE, relations with charter schools.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Freakard, Sandra. For information discussion, I have just a few that are more housekeeping than anything else. The first one is policy BBBA, which I put up on the screen here, and it's called board member qualifications. This is an update based on House Bill 2416 to ARS 15421. And just specifies that in addition to not being an employee of the district, a board member cannot be someone who directly provides certificated or support services or is the employee of a third-party contractor. So that recommended revision just updates the policy in that regard. Any questions on that before I go to the next? The next one is policy BEDF, which is called voting method. Again, more housekeeping than anything. We already, Sandra already keeps our minutes in this manner to comply with the rules here, but our policy didn't have the language, the most recent language. So that is adding that on a show of hands or roll call, an indication of how each member voted, the names of the members who proposed each motion, and the names of the people as given who make statements or present material to the public, to the board. And reference to legal action about which the person made statements or was presenting material. Again, Sandra's manner of keeping the minutes complies with this, but our policy just needs to be updated. Any questions about that? Okay. And then finally, we are recommending deletion per ASPA's recommendation of, I'm sorry, what's that? That's an information. Of policy LBD, which is called Relations with Charter Schools. This policy is being recommended for deletion because the statute, ARS 15189, has been repealed. Are there any questions about that? Okay, this is a first read. We can bring it back, if there is no discussion, we can bring it back on consent, it looks like. Okay, so we'll bring this to the next available board meeting on consent for your approval. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Marshall. Okay, moving to our consent agenda. I move to approve the consent agenda as presented. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Kravitz seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. The consent agenda is approved. Moving to our action items now. First one is action item 6A. Are there any questions or discussion on the recommendation to approve the modernization project feasibility study for Hohokam Elementary School?
Do we have a presentation?
We have a presentation.
The presentation? Isn't there?
There's something?
It's an
We haven't
action
had,
item.
we haven't had
It's an
the
action
feasibility
item.
study
We've been given the presentation already at the last
So-
board meeting.
But Dennis, in case there are any questions, or
We had,
No.
Yeah,
Darlene?
they presented to us and their,
They did after,
their,
We,
After we met
We-
individually.
they did.
we did meet individually,
we did meet.
and
We would
we
like to
discussed.
just take a
I
few
thought there was
minutes
a
to
follow-up to what we
wrap it
discussed.
up in a little bow for you.
That's what I
Yeah,
thought,
like
because
what
I
the
think there was a
final
follow-up meeting
decision.
after our regular meeting that was going to happen, and that would give us more insight tonight, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
we're gonna close out, because remember,
Okay.
there was
Presented
a
meeting?
yes.
August 22nd community meeting.
Yeah.
In which we had 45 folks. I don't want to steal SPS's thunder. There were 45 folks that were in
At
attendance,
Coronado.
and they all voted. And so why don't I introduce SPS Plus and let them go through their very quick slides. And then if you have any questions,
We
we
already
can
decided the
tackle
EX or
them.
the
then.
SOS.
So I'm not crazy. We did have them present to us 2 nights before the community meeting,
You
correct?
did.
Correct.
We don't know whether
Correct.
it's an
But they
EXR or
did-
an
oh,
SOS.
yes.
But
Yes.
exactly, we were
Yes.
told that night that there would be a follow-up
Okay.
meeting. They
Yeah.
would look at the top 2 options, correct? And
Right.
We're
we go
bringing
back.
you one.
And,
And the-
and that
The
you would,
attachment to your board agenda item,
Yes.
these 2
Yes.
pages are the 2 configurations we're recommending, both partially new, partially old. That's what they basically presented as their recommendation.
and I was told with that, we would also be having the idea of what the budget would be given both scenarios.
If
So,
you'd like to buckle up, we'll get you locked in here in just a
yeah,
minute.
and I'm not asking for the exact budget. It was just like what we did with Cherokee, where we said, this example is what we think, this might be a percentage of that, and kind of give us an idea of priority. And then I have to apologize, I do have to run to the next one. Do you want to take a, want us to continue? Yes, go right ahead.
Okay. Board member Beckham has excused herself for a moment.
So, looks like Darlene's gonna strike out on her own here and give you guys the quick presentation. So, we'll answer questions right after she's done.
Do we want to wait?
Good evening.
Said to continue.
All right. Good evening, board members, President Beckman, Dr. Creekard. Thank you for letting me speak again tonight. We are coming back to you, oh, we're doing stuff. It's awesome. All right, so we are coming back to you today. At our last meeting, we had a discussion of where the overall facility evaluation had come from. We gave you an overview of the community meetings, of the visioning session, and today we're coming back with, after our last visioning session, which was on the 22nd, held at Coronado High School. And we have, we're just gonna summarize, we have a, you know what, I kinda got ahead of myself here. But we are gonna summarize and provide you with a recommendation. So it's myself, Darlene Cadman, Mark Davenport, and Neil Pirat are here as well. And we have Fred Bueller from Chase Building Team to talk about costs. So we do have all of that today. So we're going to talk, I'm going to very quickly go over sort of a quick overview of the community outreach results, the visioning team, and the facilities assessment, which you heard some of last time. Also going to talk about the cost overview, which I'll let Fred discuss. And we are going to make a recommendation to you and talk about next steps should we proceed with that recommendation. So the community outreach, as we mentioned previously, we had 2 meetings before our last discussion at the board, and then we had a third one on August 22nd. Generally, all of the meetings were around 40 people in attendance, the first and third having the most attendance. And of note, meeting number 2 was the one that was participated in where people did various activities, and I think a few of you were at that particular meeting. The third meeting that was held on the 22nd went very well.
We provided the same information that we provided at the board meeting on the 20th of August. And at that one, we did the same vote that we had done on the previous community meeting number 1. And at that one, again, the votes came out the same, that overwhelmingly renovate the existing and do a new addition was the chosen option by the community. Of note, in meeting number 1, we had more votes for modernizing the existing than we did in the third meeting, which we had 0 votes for. So you see a significant shift from the first community meeting, which was, I guess, more along the lines of save the Haver and let's keep it exactly the way it is, to coming around to the idea that the school probably does need some work and maybe could have some benefit of change. And so by the third meeting, we saw overwhelmingly people would prefer to see renovate and a new addition. There were still some votes for new, which was consistent on both. There were 9 on the first meeting and 7 on the third meeting. The visioning sessions, as we mentioned, we had a great team with us, the Hohokam School. We had many staff, we had community, we had Mr. Rayler and his team as well. We had 3 meetings as well. You're going to see 1, 2, 3 a lot. We had 3 different things that happened. We had the first workshop, Reflect and Inspire, where we looked at education themes. We had school tours where we toured around to see what else is going on in the valley and some opportunities to see modernized schools. And then the third one was a Discover workshop where, again, the group looked at what are the options that we can consider for this school, which is the business as usual option we talked about, the light modernization, and then the renovation with new addition and the new. And these 2 images show, again, the ranked choice voting, where the EXR, as it's noted, or the blue sticky notes, was the chosen option, which again is the renovation with the new addition on the school. Coming in second to that is the SOS option, as we called it, or the start over option. So both of those options led the way, again, with the visioning team as well. The facility evaluation, which you heard about at the last meeting, and I'll just reiterate again, that there are significant site requirements that need some work. The administration, location, and entry from safety, security, and wayfinding could definitely use some work. The drop-off requirements, you get significant queuing back on Granite Reef, additional parking required. The landscape we talked about, and everybody loves the trees and the courtyards. We did talk about that some of those trees are definitely needing to be removed because they're not in great condition, but there are a number of them that can be saved, and the condition of the courtyards that can be maintained. And site services replacement. We talked about the drainage, how there is very little drainage on this site around the school and around the buildings, and that there is definitely a requirement to replace the existing services that were put there in 1960. So they're a little worn out. Building requirements. Again, last time we talked about the mechanical electrical system. These lovely photos indicate some of the original equipment that was put in somewhere between 1960 and 1964 that could use some replacement. Some very interesting developments in bringing in AV and data requirements into some of the classrooms, and some of the worn out systems mechanically and electrically that just need to be replaced. The existing building shell, the structure, is in fabulous condition. There is some cracking, there are some some water damage to some of the structure, but essentially the structure of the facility is in fantastic shape. And then lastly, that the functional requirements of the schools, the way that education is delivered and learning happens in schools today is a lot different than it was in 1960. And also the material and code upgrades needs to be looked at. So architecturally, there are some significant revisions that need to occur. Keeping in mind that the facility evaluation just talks about the systems and not about the quality and the character of these buildings. The historic Hohokam School, you see a lot of brick, and we actually learned recently from a mason whose family actually did the masonry on the site that the block that I like so much that I call breeze block is actually called lace block, and it is a clay block. And the guy whose family worked on the masonry originally is hoping to work on the job again. So we'll see if we get a legacy project out of that. We talk about the overhangs with the low roof lines and the narrow profile, the mid-century modern appearance and the low-scale residential quality of this school, and also the courtyard's character, which is really the heart of the school and something that all of the students and all of the staff and pretty much anybody who comes to these meetings in support of Hohokam School will tell you about is the quality and the character of those courtyards and how lovely it is. I think they miss it currently from not being at Hohokam. At this point, I'm going to let Chase, Fred, if you could come up and just talk briefly about the cost overview. If you like. Ready?
Yep. Thank you, Darlene. Madam President, members of the governing board, and Dr. Creekhart, on behalf of Chase Building Team, we're excited to be part of this project and partner with SPS and work closely with Dennis. We're excited to be part of this process, and based on what we know today, which is based on the site evaluation that SPS has done, their engineers' input, our preliminary investigations, and our historical cost data that we've done that we have based on our recent projects, comparing that on the renovation or the adaptive reuse, and comparing it to new elementary schools that Chase Building Team has recently built over the past couple years, and taking that information of the new schools, adapting it to the site of Hohokam and what we know on that site, and forecasting it for 2020 Q1 start date. We assess that an adaptive reuse would be approximately 1.5% less than a new build right now.
Thanks, Fred. So based on that information, the costing, the information we've seen in the visioning sessions, the information in the facility evaluation, and certainly not to be ignored, the community meetings, it is absolutely something to look at, the adaptive reuse. And this is the City of Scottsdale's definition of adaptive reuse, which is keeping life in these buildings and developing a new use for an older building or a building originally designed for a specific and special purpose. So we think that adaptive reuse is definitely the right way to go on this project, and it's our recommendation to proceed with an adaptive reuse of the existing Haver schoolhouses and construction of new single-story additions at the Hohokam School, based on all of the information today. Dennis, would you like to add anything to that?
So our original budget for this campus back in 2016 was about $16 million. When we, after Hopi, Pima, what we're seeing in the market with the escalation, we took dollars from Navajo, that since we made the decision to restore Navajo, and we've increased this budget to $20 million. So it's not affecting any future builds. We're taking that money from the Navajo project. And so at this point, we are right in the $20 million mark. And Chase has confirmed that that's where they're going to be. So whether it's a rebuild or an adaptive reuse with some new, we're in that general vicinity. 1.5% is almost negligible, but I think we heard loud and clear that the community wanted to save something. And so SPS Plus has done their job to vet that building and to make sure that what we do save has value and doesn't detract from a new school. Most people probably don't even notice, but their idea of how the building will look is on that drawing, on the slide that's there now. Basically removing two of the classroom wings that are on the north side and removing the band and music room, and then maintaining 6 of the classroom wings, and then having 2 new high-volume buildings for PE, cafeteria, library, front office, all of that. So Chase Building Team brought a team together. It was very impressive. Last week, they brought in all of their major subs to really look at this project to say, yeah, we could probably do it. We could make this renovation work so that we're not spending more on a renovation than we are for a new build. So they got that input in a matter of 5 or 6 days from the last time we were here. And so we're comfortable with the notion of keeping some of it and building new on some of it, correcting some water issues on the site, since it is mostly flat, correcting parent queuing, bus loops, fire, and all the code issues. So we'd like your approval to move forward in this direction at this point, and then we'll be back in a couple of months to start talking about design.
Board Member Furtherburg.
I just have one quick question. In our individual meetings, we had discussed not only the time saving that we have with students not being on this campus while this is being rebuilt, but there's also a dollar savings attached, kind of. We weren't given an estimate, but is that 20 million budget, is that kind of savings for the fact, is that already in that budget, those savings?
So without an actual design, we couldn't give you a hard and fast number.
Sure.
They literally, that sketch that you see right there, that's all that Chase had to work with. And we did this very much on purpose. We wanted to make sure that this community knew that we didn't have a preconceived notion, that we weren't forging forward without them knowing about it. So when we went to the community meeting on the 22nd, Darlene and Neil and Mark went fast and furious to just come up with this sketch, something that Chase could then look at historical facts, historical costs, and then what do we have to work with? How much campus do we have to work with, and all of that. So we will work real hard, as I have for the last 2 years, to make sure that we get the best product for the best price. So our $20 million number, that's what I'm going to hold their feet to the fire on. And if it starts to go in any other direction, we'll come back and let you know.
Thank you.
Just some clarity, so that if anyone from the Navajo community is listening or watching, when you said you took money from Navajo, you're meaning because they had insurance funds to kind of offset
Right,
what
between
we
the,
budgeted for them, right?
yes, between the insurance money
savings.
and the reduced scope, we're not rebuilding the school. But we actually brought the Navajo Visioning Committee through last week, and I think they would all agree that they were just thrilled with the work that we're doing over there.
Great. Any further questions or discussion?
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to thank you and SPS for the work that you did. I think that it represented the community well. I know the community really appreciates it. And I think it's important to note that probably that cost differential that's less than what people might anticipate because of remodel is partly because there is going to be a lot of new buildings as well as new drainage as well. So it will look as if it's most likely a new building.
Yeah, the savings is
With
really
everything
in
that's
the
modern.
6 shells that we're saving, but everything else, they're completely gutted. I think
That's at 84%.
Neil, if I could use your term, he's calling it a nose blow on the six existing buildings. There will be nothing left in them. There's
Yep.
going to be just shells.
The other thing, could you just give a quick timeline of an estimated timeline for the community since they're listening?
I'd like to
Is
say
that
no.
possible? Okay.
If you could give me another month, then I'd be happy to give you a nice, solid timeline. But the design
Please come
team
back in a month and give us.
really has not.
I would
When you come
appreciate
back
that.
with the GMP,
Well, it'll be
We'll-
before
we'll-
then.
We'll get you information sooner than that.
Thank you.
Okay, I just think the community's going to be interested.
Yeah.
Any further questions? No? Okay, I move to approve action item 6A, the modernization project feasibility study for Holcomb Elementary School. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Kravitz seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Okay, moving now to action. Congratulations. All right, moving now to action item 6B. Are there any questions or discussion on the approval of general council goals for 2019 and 2020? Any questions, comments from board members?
and we have
I do.
guest Jennifer McLennan, outside counsel, is here to help guide us through this process.
Madam President, members of the board, you do have a time frame under your governing board policy with respect to the adoption of goals for the general council. Board policy indicates that that's to be done by September 30th of each year. And you do have another board meeting after this one on September 17th if you want to delay discussion on that. Board policy also states that the board is to consider up to 5 operational goals. So I believe that Ms. Marshall has suggested and provided to you a copy of 4 proposed goals as well as what the board adopted last year.
Anyone else has anything to say? No? Well, then I will.
Okay, Board Member Beckham.
Looking at a little bit of history, this is the evaluation tool and the goals was an idea that came to fruition last year. We had an opportunity as a board this past May to actually use the goals and the evaluation tool and see if what we thought would work. And I think for the most part it was productive. There were a few areas after the evaluation that I had made note of and had mentioned in, I think in the executive session. And so I'd like to, and they weren't anything that was private about performance, but just as a overview of goals and then the evaluation tool. So I'd like to address that at this time. I wasn't around when the district, yes?
Sorry, just really, are you saying you're going to be saying stuff that you said in executive session publicly now?
No.
Oh, okay, all right, sorry,
no.
that threw me off. All right,
Well, I
that's
guess
fine.
I might be saying in general, it could be, but it's not going to be anything that is confidential in exec session.
Madam President, Ms. Beckham, I would just caution you that you should not be revealing anything that was discussed in executive session, as that hasn't been authorized to be discussed in public. And we need to limit our discussion tonight to the adoption or the discussion of the operational goals. So to the extent that any of the issues that you'd like to speak about concern the operational goals that have been proposed for the general council, you're free to speak to those.
Okay, great.
So,
So I was not here when the district decided to hire a general counsel. But I understand, and so any other board members that were around, and remember that, I would
Not on
love, because
board.
I'm making some assumptions here. I'm assuming that we hired general counsel because we wanted to mitigate our legal risk, and then possibly to reduce the cost of using outside counsel, because then we could use inside counsel. So given that those are the main expectations and goals that we had in mind for general counsel, I kind of use those as guidelines as to seeing what the general counsel goals are, and do they meet those particular items? Does that make sense?
it does. I would just also state that your policy says that the operational goals are going to align to your strategic plan. So just keep that over in mind as well.
Okay. So when I looked at the goals, I got, my first thought is that number 3 and number 4 didn't really meet those two expectations of what our general counsel would be doing. That they are more of an administrative goal. And so I recognize that we may not have the capacity to have another individual or department doing those, and we're asking our general counsel to do it at this time. But I would hope that if we maintain those as goals, is that those are 2, 3, and 4 really goals that maybe are short-term, and then maybe we would add a 5th goal that would say we would transfer these duties of improving the process or the conflict of interest disclosures and compliance to maybe the department that should be responsible for them, whether that's HR or if that's whoever handles, I would think it might be HR. And for public records, it most likely is the communications department or our public information officer. And then the general counsel would be just getting the records and then legally dealing with legal matters with those two items of conflict of interest and public records requests. And so the legal isn't handling the administrative. So I wanted to put that out there. I had talked to our general counsel about that, and I just didn't know how other board members felt. I hope
And
that made sense.
If I could follow up, my understanding of what you meant when you talked about administrative was some of the sort of mechanics of issues that I've found in those two areas of conflict and public records, which have to do with, is the technology what we need? I mean, the technology probably was one of the biggest issues. But overall, with respect to conflict of interest, the recommendations from both the Attorney General and the auditors has been legal keeps a central file, HR keeps something in each personnel file. So I do still have that responsibility, or, you know, given what we've been through in that, with respect to that topic, but also training employees on compliance with that, with the recent changes to the law from HB 2663, which is continuing to evolve a bit. You know, I've been very involved in making sure that our employees are trained, and when they have questions about, is this a conflict, or, you know, inviting them to call me and talk about it if they think that there's something that there's a question about. So I wouldn't say with respect to conflict that the general topic isn't appropriate for the general counsel position, but I don't disagree that maybe some of the administrative, as you termed it, might be.
Function.
Right.
So, and that's what I'm speaking about. I'm not speaking about that you wouldn't follow through on what has been asked by the Attorney General and have the record keeping or answer any questions in the training, but it's really that administrative side that is very time consuming, as well as with the public records requests, which can be very time consuming.
So could there, and I don't know if this is what you were asking in number 5, but my interpretation of what you're asking or saying is that we've laid out these goals, and maybe a number 5 could be a goal to offload anything that is not necessarily legal or in her purview, to be showing us some sort of progress in moving off the administrative side to someone else so that she can focus
To
more
the
on the
appropriate
legal
department.
side of it. And that could be, you know, general.
That's an appropriate goal, in my opinion. You could do it one of two ways. You could add a 5th goal that asks Ms. Marshall to report to the board regarding her efforts to offload administrative tasks to other personnel. Or you could make it a part of, because it really does apply only to 3 and 4, you could make that, you could insert language into 3 and 4 that be a part of the progress reporting.
And I am not trying to push this in any manner. That's why I would really like to get other board members' opinions and then believe it should go back to our existing general counsel to see if that is realistic, and then hear back from her.
I think it's a great idea. Board Member Perleberg?
I agree, and I would just, from what I'm hearing, is make sure that that goal also includes the technology component that you discussed needing to, and maybe it's not you necessarily shopping for the technology, but the goal is that you would bring back progress on the technology search to make sure this job is manageable. In that goal, yeah.
Right, and with the measurability, I mean, just kind of jumping off of that, in my opinion, and you guys weigh in, I would like to see that added, and then potentially kind of some support next time around here of some evidence that's measurable behind that. I did this with technology or administration, therefore I was able to support more over here, and I otherwise would not have been. So.
Yeah, it's mostly to free up Michelle's time to
But
actually
to have her
focus
show us
on,
or illustrate
Right.
next year when we're reviewing the goals of the council, that she had this to start with, there, she implemented this, and this was because she implemented this, she was able to do more of these things that were required
Mitigating
by
legal
the actual,
risk. and
mitigating legal risk.
And reducing outside
Yes.
counsel.
Would it be the purview of the board to add it to the existing goals or create a new one?
This may be something that maybe our general counsel could look at, see what is most agreeable to you as far as you see goals. And maybe look at the wording so that we make sure that it's real clear.
And one thing I would really want to do before bringing it back is talk to Dr. Creekard and Cabinet about who's the right position to
Yes.
take
Right.
some
If
of
there's-
those things
if
and
that's
what would be
available.
the expectation and plan so that that person isn't just sort of
Surprise.
like, what do I do with this? You know,
Right. Yeah. That makes sense.
Fix one problem creates another.
So, are we going to vote on this, or are we going to table this, or are we going to modify something and vote now?
I will say that I purposely said possible action. I didn't think you'd get there today. I wanted to get a sense from each of you and maybe some consensus from all of you of what direction you'd like to see me go. What I did with these goals was revise what the goals were from last year. So, you know, if there are things that aren't represented here in terms of strategic plan or supporting other areas, we still, you know, I still invite each of you to follow up and tell me what you're thinking in that regard, and we can certainly continue that discussion. As Ms. McLennan said, our policy gives us a deadline to get these determined by September 30th, but we can figure out how to get there even with that feedback after this meeting. So.
Dr. Creekard, do you have a preference? I mean, since this involves cabinet and speaking people.
I think we could come back on the 17th with revised language reflecting the discussion.
I agree.
It's what you're asking is, to me anyway, and I may be looking at it too simplistically, but we're looking for more administrative help. And we've spent quite a bit of time in the last year trying to reduce administrative help in the district office. And I understand the reasons why, they make sense. So part of the discussion that we have to have in cabinet is, do we add administrative help to her office or administrative help to HR for the conflict of interest and administrative help to the communications department for the public records requests? I mean, those are, the second, the public records request is a huge area, as I know you are well aware of. And it still requires, in many of them, a legal review of what gets released, and creates a huge time constraint on her doing legal work. To add one person in her office to do that, I don't know that would be enough. We have to have that discussion as to what that really looks like, and understand if we're not able to maintain our budget levels after the election for next year, then we'll be looking at administrative cuts in a lot of different places. So.
Oh, sorry.
Board Member
Can-
Prisler.
Thank you. Can you clarify some perception, because, you know, I would agree that our goal really isn't to add staff necessarily, just make sure everybody at their pay level is doing, you know, what they should. But my understanding, especially with the public records request, is that we were looking at technology
I have
being an
been
option,
looking
correct?
for a software solution and working with Debbie Spalding, our Chief Systems Officer.
And we actually thought we had one.
Yeah,
a
we
little
thought we
earlier,
had
and
one, but then we tried to upload an email, which is the most important or most burdensome area, one of the most, and it didn't work. And so we're back to the drawing
Okay.
board. But we do have several other vendors we're looking at, and my hope is that that will help us process that area better and faster, and assign you know, sort of our frequent flyer departments, you know, hey, who in your department, in speaking with cabinet, do you want to put in charge of getting me the records, you know, telling me what the universe of records is, so that we can try to respond to people faster.
Board Member Beckham.
And let me know if I understand this correctly. We're one of the few larger districts that has a general counsel.
Right.
So I don't think, does Chandler even have a?
Not in-house.
counsel?
No,
They
not
don't.
in-house.
So what do they do with their public records?
They don't have nearly
So-
the volume that we have. Gilbert is the large district. Mr. Gadd was there last year.
Yes.
You have any idea of what the amount was annually of records requests?
Couple a month at most.
A couple what?
Couple
Peanuts.
of
Couple a
public
month?
records requests per month
Peanuts.
at
Couple
most.
and we.
Are they looking for in-house counsel?
I mean, it was.
In the last couple of years, Mrs. Marshall, we were.
We have, we keep a log, but there's roughly 200 a year, and some years are heavier.
So that's something.
And that's not all the little subparts, but.
So that's something to look at too. Why? Why do we have so many? What, could we be changing some of something on the onset that we're not then getting as many public records? So that's,
Well-
I'm not putting, that's what
Well,
you're
and
talking
part
about.
of
That's
some of
something
the
to look
software
at
that
in
we're
the
looking
future.
at is, you know, if a lot of people are requesting the same thing, do we post it? You know, there's different solutions in that regard.
Okay, great.
Again, requests for emails tends to be the biggest.
That would be an interesting analysis to see what is the most frequently requested item. And if it's not confidential, is it something that
It
we can
may-
do a better job communicating? so that
Sometimes it
doesn't-
depends on what's happening. So,
Yeah.
you know, typically if there's an override out, we'll get lots of requests for financial information. You know, when we had lots of issues going on at the top of the organization, we were getting lots of requests for information about those people. You know, it's often very dependent on what's happening in the district.
So I would point out the point that you made, maybe on some of the finance, it could be posting.
But one of the questions I will ask often is, you know, if it's something, a school parent's asking for something, I'll call the school and say, hey, what's going on? Do you need to call the parent? You know, we'll have discussions like that to try to find out what do they really want, and is there some other problem we need to be addressing? So.
Okay. Okay, any further questions? So it sounds like we are tabling this?
Bring it back.
Okay.
Thank
I
you.
move to table item 6E. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Kravitz seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. It is tabled. Okay, moving on to action item 6C, approval of revisions to policies DJE, purchasing and bidding methods, and GBEF, use of digital communications and electronic devices. There is a presentation.
Thank you.
Or are you taking questions?
I'll just remind you where we were. We'll start with DJE. Our fabulous IT folks were doing something, so I didn't want to mess it up. Let me find it here. Oh, there. You have a second page.
Board Member
Okay.
Pilberg is.
Oh, see, I was going to do that.
I will.
I'm just going to,
So policy DJE is called bidding/purchasing procedures. And as a reminder, I brought this to you for an initial read toward the end of last school year on June 6th. Most of the changes recommended were requested by our purchasing department, looking at, you know, what does our policy say? What's the most efficient use of everyone's time? What are the practices that make sense? And so most of the recommendations here are those same recommendations. We had a lot of other issues on our final board meeting of the school year, so I was asked to hold off on this and bring it back, so we're bringing it back. The only change from what I last presented to you is that since that time, there was an advisory regarding oral quotes. Let me find that here. It's kind of a long policy.
$10,000.
Sorry?
I'm talking to myself.
Where are we?
bottom of page 46, I think, Michelle.
I don't have those numbers.
Purchasing not requiring bid, it's right on the front page, I think.
Yeah, on the bottom of the.
Yeah, the $10,000
On the first page, yeah.
amount you mentioned.
There we go. Sorry, I'm still, there we go.
Right, yeah, right there.
Sorry, the blue language, I apologize. We had that language in blue, or currently have that, which says verbal price quotations, et cetera, will be requested from at least 3 vendors. Since that time, it's been updated by the Auditor General and ADE regarding the USFR to remove that 3 oral quotes requirement. And instead, districts are to obtain written price quotes from at least 3 vendors for purchases costing over, well, 10 or more and less than 100,000. So we've added that language to the paragraph following that. So that's the only change since you first looked at this on June 6th. However, it's bidding and purchasing, and I'm sure you may have some questions or comments or discussion.
Any questions? Board Member Beckham?
Please, you've got to have one.
And this is just kind of a housekeeping question that I talked to you
Right.
about. And so, why don't you just go back to the first page, so I'll let the board members know what I'm thinking.
Yes.
I think on that first page, let's see if I do it. Second paragraph says, superintendent shall prepare regulations to assure the district conforms to proper procedures and practices. And first of all, I'll say, I support what's written here. So what I said was, does this mean he or she is going to be preparing the regulation now, or has it already been done? So I kind of flipped to the bottom where we have cross-references, and the regulation wasn't there. So I went, we probably don't have one, but maybe we do. So then I had to go to the website, look up policies, and then I found the regulation. So my request was, even though I recognize that we typically have not put regulations under cross-referencing in the past, and I'm not saying that we need to go back and do them all, but I think moving forward, it might be a good idea, and I'd like to maybe start here, is to put the regulation as a cross-reference at the base of the pages, is what I would recommend or suggest.
So, yes, when I spoke with Board Member Beckham about that request, I noted that that's not the convention throughout the policy manual. We could certainly do it. Trying to do it looking back probably would be very confusing, and probably pretty tedious.
Right,
frankly.
I agree.
But
I agree.
we could certainly do it going forward if that's the request of the board or the direction of the board.
Board Member Reaper?
I think this is somewhere I would have to disagree with you on.
Okay, good.
I would agree with Michelle on this, just because for any regulations, I mean, we don't often remove them or not, but it's always DJE hyphen, it's always that format. So I think, I would say they're easy enough for anyone to find, and I just think it's strange because we would approve it. So let's just take it this way. We approve a new policy item, a new policy that calls for the creation of a regulation. That person then has to create the regulation after. We then have to go back and revise the policy to include the new regulation cross-reference.
Right.
And
So, yeah.
and one thing that I did speak with Board Member Beckham about is that unlike board members, it's my experience that most employees are going online to look at policies. And the online process, you can see right there whether there's a regulation, an exhibit, and policies are adopted by the board with a specific date as to last adoption. Regulations aren't always on the board. I try to bring them as information at least when I think you'll want to see what we're doing, or where I've heard from you, or where I've had lots of questions. But that flexibility that exists in the regulations, for the administration to kind of tweak things and bring it back to you with information is also there. So,
Well, I would just beg to differ that a cross-reference means it's a cross-reference. That's all it is an easy way to have any And maybe that's policy, the policy regulations are actually in the policy document.
Right.
So I don't see why there would be a conflict, or it's really more of something that's user-friendly, if you will. But that's the whole reason you have cross-reference down here in the first place. So that's just a personal opinion. I don't know if anybody else has, has an opinion or not, and then if they don't, then that's fine, but I just wanted to bring it
Board
up.
Member Greenberg?
Sorry, how do you access our board policies generally?
I go into our website.
Yeah, so I mean, unless we're printing them out, I would agree with Michelle that since it's written right there, and I think, it's because it's a typographical thing where we approve something and they put forward the regulation. Maybe Michelle's not involved in the creation of the regulation, maybe Jeff Gadd is, and then, we have to contact IT or whomever who updates this to update the cross-reference when it's actually something created by the, I think it adds, I mean, it could be honestly a minute of work, but I think it's something that we might forget to do often, just because it is such a minor thing, and then some policies will have it, some won't. Obviously we strive to always do things perfectly, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's super common in the Auditor General's documents or anything either, because they often have appendices or what have you that, maybe it says in the body specifically references, but it doesn't have it in the cross-reference. So, yeah, I don't really care one way or the other. I just think it's not the biggest thing.
Well, Michelle, given both sides of this, what is your opinion on you can, or maybe you could or you couldn't, or how do you feel about?
I understand why Board Member Beckham's made that point. I do think it can become confusing, and I also think that we wind up with a situation where why are some regulations cross-referenced and others aren't? This policy manual is a giant project, and when I very first came to the district, I was asked by a board member who actually worked for ASBA, get the whole thing updated. This isn't a board, I would never expect this board, any board in Scottsdale to go, okay, check off the whole thing. It's a work in progress, but I do think because of that adding references and then people wondering, why is there a reference here? Is there a reference here? If there's not a reference, then there must not be a regulation. I think it could get confusing. I have not, however, had that discussion with ASBA. I just, discussed that with Board Member Beckham this morning. Yeah. You certainly don't have to make a decision today. I can find out more information if you'd like.
But we could take action on the policy and then come back with the issue of of how we deal with regulations and cross-referencing them.
And there's exhibits too.
Yeah, and exhibits. And trying to maintain some consistency.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Do I have a motion to approve action item 6C, approval of revisions to policies DJE, purchasing and paying methods, and GBEF, use of digital communications and electronic devices?
So
But you haven't got to that point.
I haven't talked about GBEF. If you want to do one at a time, you
Okay,
can.
we're moving on then.
So should we going to approve DJE as a
No, 'cause
standalone?
it's one action item.
So wait, discuss the other one and then.
Okay.
Yeah, discuss the other one.
Okay.
Okay.
We're gonna get us out here
Good effort.
faster.
Good
It's a
effort to
nice
get us
try.
out of here.
It's much
Try.
appreciated. Okay, so policy GBEF, and now a corresponding regulation. As a reminder, we brought this policy to the board March 7th for the first time and March 19th for the second. March 19th, I was not in attendance and there were some questions, and so the board tabled it, and also indicated that you'd like to see us have discussion with staff about, make sure people are going to understand what we're trying to do with this policy, find out what the questions are, and come back to you with a recommendation. So that's what we did. I requested our assistant superintendents in charge of secondary and elementary to ask their principals to send me some teachers to work on this with us, and they did that. And then we also had a principal, some representatives from Human Resources, our director and assistant superintendent from HR, and I think I'm not forgetting anyone. So we met several times, talked about this policy and another one that I'm not bringing back tonight, policy KD. We'll bring that another time. And we had a great discussion about, well, what does this mean, and what are some examples, and how does this work? And so what I'm bringing back is the recommendations from the committee, which are new recommendations to this policy in addition to what I brought to you in March, but also a recommendation to add a regulation with the intent of helping employees understand what the rules are. The regulation, I'm trying to open it here, is almost entirely from our teacher employment handbook. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the regulation in here.
Is it not there?
It looks like it didn't make it here. You do have it in your materials, and I can try to figure this out in a moment. But I'll just say the regulation is almost entirely from the technology use portion of the teacher employment handbook.
Certified handbook.
Sorry, the certified handbook. Did I say DEA? The certified employee handbook. And so our discussion, especially with our teachers in the group, was, that using that as a guiding document was helpful. So we kind of went through what's the language in the technology part of that handbook, and what makes sense for this policy and regulation. And I apologize, I don't have the regulation up here. But I will go ahead and start to take your questions while I try to figure out how I can do that.
Want me to send it?
Maybe, yeah.
Let's see if that'll work.
Might even be able to send it from. Stephanie is the person.
Can I get clarification? We are not approving the regulation, though.
No,
Because
it's for
we just-
information and to
Even though
let you
it's
know.
stated
that
on here that we are, we aren't because it's a
No.
regulation.
Right, the
Okay, I just
regulation
want
is for
people
your
to understand.
information, and certainly if you don't like it, you can go back to the drawing board. But no, the approval is requested for the policy itself.
See if you get it, Michelle.
Did you send it to me?
Well, I sent it to board.
In the
Want me to send it to you?
do we have any questions about the policy currently from board members? While she's seeing if she can pull that up. That was loaded. Board member Beckham.
I just have one quick minute. I think.
Thank you, I got
that the policy really does explain what.
Do you want the one from, this is the final.
That's fine. We do not have a regulation currently, so it's all new. So a red line would be helpful here.
Yeah.
It's in the board book right now, too.
Yeah, it's in the book.
Okay. So that's the regulation.
Page 61, if you're interested.
It's there.
Right, there it is.
We've got the regulation up here, and I can
Okay.
toggle back to the policy itself as well.
Board member Beckham has a question about the policy.
Okay?
And it's just real, once again, another housekeeping clarification, second page, where it says the superintendent shall communicate the above to all employees of the district. I am wondering if we should say superintendent, but it and/or designee, or to actually designate human resources and give who's responsible for it, because you obviously are, the superintendent, he or she would not actually be the one communicating.
And superintendent or designee is a common reference in the policy manual that you could really do either, designate the specific position or add it as or designate.
Yeah.
Okay, we can add that.
Questions, concerns on that?
Makes sense.
Okay, any further questions on the policy?
I will tell you that we did discuss, how are we going to roll it out and communicate with employees, and the first stop will be our admin inbox and teacher talk weekly newsletters. And then I spoke with Dr. Bowman about using the teacher handbook committee to review, what kind of technology are our employees using, what makes sense for people in different positions, such as coaches, communicating with families and that kind of thing. So I think we have a pretty good plan to make sure people understand what we've just done here, or we're about to do.
So I do have one more question.
Board Member Beckham.
I remembered that next paragraph actually does give a timeline in which the superintendent must come to the board and the employees prior to the start of every school year and to any newly elected board members prior to taking office, and any new hires to approve the use of, establish which technologies. So is this really anticipated that every year is this going to be coming to a board meeting? Is this, how are we going to comply with this part of the policy?
And that is ASBA language, not our recommendation. I mean, it became part of our recommendation. We did not discuss that provision in particular. We have a lot of items that we do at the beginning of each school year. I didn't discuss this particular one with Dr. Creekard.
How do you see that?
So-
Is it something we want to have in there that it's every year?
I did talk about it with our chief systems officer, and she has been working on what technologies are out there and what's allowed, and having those discussions, those fun discussions with staff.
So there are a whole host of things that we communicate to employees at the start of the year, things that they sign, things that they have to read. The new employee orientation has a large list of things.
But this specific-
Probably a good question about, is this something that I'd like to have or not like to have? I think because of the changing nature of technology, it probably makes sense to have it, and it's just something we would do now. Prior to every school year, prior to the start of every school year, starting school on the 5th of August, when there may have been some statutory changes that didn't take place. We may know about them, but to come in by then may have been difficult. I just worry about hard approval dates when we are dependent on other sources for getting the information to them. That's all. But in terms of notifying the board of any changes as a normal course of updating policies would make sense. Start of the school year may be more difficult than some date later to gather that in. I don't know. I think we should have it in, as I said, because I think there are changes that take place. But
So 2 things you could do right there is, again, use that or designee at the beginning, superintendent or designee shall establish. And then you could change, instead of prior to the start of every school year, you could say annually. Or
Annually.
something a little
Yeah,
more
thank you.
flexible.
Or
Thank you.
Or not just-
I
just
obviously
make sure
was struggling.
Not prior, yeah.
And employees annually, right?
Yeah.
That also gives the flexibility if all of a sudden there's a new technology out there in the middle of January.
Right.
That it can be added.
Right.
Not that you can do that anymore.
I agree.
Any other feedback on this one?
Okay, we ready to move on here then? All right, I motion to approve action item 6C, approval of revisions to policies DJE, purchasing and bidding methods, and GBEF, use of digital communications and electronic devices. Do I have a second?
You need to say as amended.
As amended, you're correct, as amended.
I'll second.
Board Member Perleberg seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. I also move to adjourn our special meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Kravitz seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. The meeting is adjourned at 7:35.